In this video, we will journey through the story of Moses. His birth, his divine calling at the burning bush to his final moment. Please subscribe, like and share. Also drop a comment below. Let's know what part of Moses' story touched you the most. After the death of Joseph, a new pharaoh arose and the land of Egypt gleamed with gold yet dripped with the tears of slaves. Beneath the shadow of Pharaoh's might, the Hebrews groaned in anguish, their backs bent beneath the weight of brick and straw. The sun rose each day over fields where Hebrew hands built monuments for kings who despised them. The air trembled with their cries, rising heavenward like incense of sorrow, and heaven listened. Pharaoh was afraid because the Hebrews were growing in number. What if they join our enemy to fight against us, he wondered. Fear turned to cruelty. He decreed that every newborn Hebrew boy must be cast into the Nile, swallowed by the river before he could draw his first breath of freedom. Mothers wept in secret, fathers clenched their fists, helpless. Hope became a dangerous word. Yet amid this despair, a quiet defiance flickered, a faith that would not die. In one small home within Goshen's narrow streets, a Hebrew woman named Jochebed labored in silence, her heart trembling between terror and love. Her husband Amram watched helplessly, praying under his breath that no Egyptian guard would hear the faint cry of new life. When the child came, his skin glowed soft as dawn, his eyes deep with a calm that seemed to whisper of destiny. Jochebed looked upon her son and knew, this was no ordinary child. For 3 months she hid him, cradling him beneath woven blankets when soldiers passed by. Every footstep outside the door made her heart stop. She muffled his cries with her own trembling lips, whispering lullabies mixed with tears. But as the child grew, the walls could no longer keep his voice from the world. She knew she could not hide him forever. And so, with trembling hands and steadfast faith, Jochebed prepared to surrender him, not to death, but to the God of her fathers. She took a basket of reeds, sealing its edges with pitch so the water would not enter. She lined it with soft linen, the last thread of her motherly care. The morning light shimmered upon the Nile as she placed the child inside. Her daughter, Miriam, watched silently from the reeds, her young eyes wide with both courage and grief. The river's surface rippled, carrying the tiny ark away. Jochebed's hands lingered in the water, unwilling to release, but she whispered, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, into your hands I give him. The basket drifted toward the royal gardens, where Pharaoh's daughter often bathed, surrounded by her maidens. That morning, the princess stepped into the water, her golden bracelets catching the sun. She heard the faint cry and turned. What is that sound? She asked. Her maidens retrieved the basket, and when the lid was lifted, the baby's tears caught her heart. Compassion softened her gaze. This is one of the Hebrew children, she said, her voice trembling between pity and awe. Miriam, seizing courage, stepped forward from her hiding place. Shall I find a nurse among the Hebrew women to care for him? She asked. The princess nodded. Go, she said, never suspecting that Miriam would run straight back to Jochebed. And so, the mother who released her son into the river received him again, this time under the protection of Pharaoh's house. She nursed him, not in secret now, but in quiet wonder at God's mercy. When he was weaned, she brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who named him Moses, saying, Because I drew him out of the water. Moses grew in the courts of Egypt, robed in linen and taught by scholars. He learned to read the stars, to speak the languages of empires, to wield the sword of soldiers. He dined among princes, yet something within him always stirred when he heard the distant echoes of the Hebrew tongue. In his heart, he was never one of Pharaoh's sons. As the years passed, Egypt's splendor surrounded him. Towering temples, feasts of abundance, processions of gods carved in stone. Yet every monument whispered a secret truth. They stood upon the backs of the broken. Moses often walked among the labor camps, unseen, watching the men who groaned beneath the whips of taskmasters. One day, he locked eyes with an old slave whose face bore the strength of faith that would not die. That silent exchange carved a mark upon Moses' heart deeper than any royal teaching. He began to ask questions no one could answer. Who am I, truly? Why does the sight of their pain feel like my own? The gods of Egypt were many, but none spoke to the ache within him. He felt drawn to the stories whispered in secret by the Hebrews, of one true God who hears, who remembers, who delivers. Pharaoh himself never knew that the very child raised in his palace would one day challenge his throne. Heaven's plans often rise quietly within the enemy's own walls. And so, while Egypt worshipped its idols and the Israelites toiled in the heat, destiny matured silently in the corridors of power. Moses had grown strong, his body and mind trained among princes, yet his spirit was restless. The wealth of Egypt, the gold of Pharaoh's halls, the praises of scholars, none could silence the echo of his people's suffering. He wandered the palace corridors, observing Hebrew slaves toil under merciless overseers, their backs scarred, their hands blistered. Each cry, each sigh, weighed upon him like a stone. His heart ached, and anger burned quietly beneath his royal robes. One day, as he walked near the labor camps, he witnessed an Egyptian striking a Hebrew man, a father whose hands bore the marks of years spent building Pharaoh's monuments. Rage erupted within Moses, unchecked and consuming. Without thought, he struck the Egyptian with his fist, then again, and the overseer fell lifeless upon the sands. Silence enveloped the camp. The Hebrew laborers froze, their eyes wide, unsure whether to fear him or revere him. News traveled swiftly through the halls of Pharaoh's palace. His act, though born of justice, was now branded as murder. Fear seized him, a chilling reminder that even his royal birth could not shield him from consequences. Moses fled under the cover of night, leaving behind his robes, his rank, and the life of privilege he had known. He walked alone through the desert, the wind scouring his skin, the sun scorching his shoulders. He wandered for days, driven by both terror and a gnawing desire for purpose. At last, he came upon the land of Midian, where valleys stretched wide, and flocks grazed beneath the watch of rugged shepherds. There, he rested by a well, weary and thirsty, his soul heavy with doubt. As he drew water for the flocks, he witnessed young women harassed by shepherds who would have driven them from the well. Moses, though exhausted, intervened. He struck fear into the men with his courage, and the women drew water untroubled. Their father, Jethro, welcomed him, seeing in Moses a man of strength and integrity. Among these strangers, he found shelter and purpose. He married Zipporah, Jethro's daughter, and tended the flocks, learning patience in the quiet of the desert. Yet even amid this calm, the memory of Egypt haunted him, the cries of the enslaved, the images of suffering, the injustice he could not forget. Years passed, and Moses became familiar with the rhythms of desert life. He led the flocks to graze, guided them to water, and spoke gently to his wife and children beneath the stars. But destiny had not forgotten him. One morning, as the sun rose over the slopes of Mount Horeb, he saw a sight that stopped him in his tracks, a bush engulfed in flames, yet not consumed. The fire flickered, alive and consuming, but the branches remained untouched, green and vibrant. Moses approached, awe and fear mingling within him. Then, a voice called from the flames. "Moses! Moses!" He froze. His heart pounded, and he knelt, shielding his eyes from the brightness. "Here I am," he answered, his voice trembling. "Do not come any closer," the voice commanded. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground." Moses obeyed, bowing low, feeling the heat of both fire and awe upon him. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." The ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble as the voice continued. "I have seen the affliction of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries. I know their suffering. I have come to deliver them and bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey." The words struck Moses' heart. The fire burned brighter, yet he felt warmth rather than pain, a call that stirred purpose deep within him. God commanded him to return to Egypt, to confront Pharaoh, and to deliver the Israelites. Moses faltered. Fear gripped him. "Who am I," he asked, "that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And the voice was firm, yet patient. "I will be with you. Speak to Pharaoh. Perform the signs I give you, and they will believe." Moses' doubts remained, and he questioned his own abilities, speaking of his slow tongue and hesitant speech. God's answer came like a bomb. I am the one who formed man's mouth. I will teach you what to say. Take your brother Aaron, he will speak for you. Together, you will lead my people." Then God instructed Moses to cast his staff upon the ground. When he did, it became a serpent. Moses recoiled, heart racing, but at God's command, he grasped it by the tail, and it returned to a staff in his hand. The miracle confirmed the truth. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had called him. He was chosen, not by merit, but by purpose. For the first time, Moses understood that exile had not been a punishment but a preparation. Every step he had taken, every night spent wandering alone, every hardship endured, had led to this encounter. The shepherd of Midian would now become the deliverer of Israel. With renewed resolve, Moses returned to his family, gathered his wife Zipporah, and began the journey back to Egypt. Each step carried weight, the memory of the slaves' cries echoing in his mind, guiding him forward. His staff, once a tool for tending flocks, now became the instrument of God's power. His heart, once heavy with guilt and fear, now carried courage and unwavering faith. The wilderness had taught him patience, resilience, and the quiet strength of obedience. The burning bush had taught him trust, humility, and the certainty that he was not alone. God's presence went before him, unseen but palpable, guiding his steps toward the destiny he could no longer deny. As Moses traveled toward the land he had once fled, he understood that Pharaoh's palace, the rivers, and the mountains were all part of a plan far greater than his understanding. He felt the weight of history pressing upon him, the expectation of generations who had endured slavery, and the promise of freedom waiting beyond the horizon. Every glance at the horizon reminded him, Egypt would not hold them forever. The voice of fire lingered in his memory, echoing with authority and compassion. "I will be with you," it had said. And Moses believed. He would confront Pharaoh, he would challenge injustice, and he would lead a people who had known only chains into the light of liberty. The journey ahead was fraught with danger, yet he stepped forward with a heart strengthened by faith and a mind sharpened by years of quiet exile. The shepherd of Midian now carried the weight of a nation's hope. The man who once fled in fear now moved with the certainty of God's calling. Every shadow in the desert, every whisper of wind, every crackle of flame reminded him that purpose is forged in patience, tested by trials, and revealed in obedience. Moses, walking toward Egypt, understood that the moment of confrontation with Pharaoh was not merely political, but spiritual. Freedom would not be claimed by might alone. It would come through the power of God manifesting through him. The staff in his hand, the fire in his heart, and the voice in the bush were assurances that he was ready. And so, he continued his journey, leaving behind the comfort of Midian, stepping into the uncertain lands of Egypt with a resolve that would shape the destiny of a people. The exile had ended, the mission had begun, and the flame that did not consume him burned brighter than ever, guiding every footstep toward deliverance. The children of Israel, groaning beneath Pharaoh's oppression, did not yet know that their hope walked among them, prepared by God, shaped by trials, and ready to lead them into freedom. Moses had answered the call. Egypt, with all its might, was about to meet the man chosen to bring its slaves into the light. As he approached the familiar lands, the words of the burning bush echoed endlessly in his heart. "I will be with you." And Moses knew, finally, that he was never alone, and that the path ahead, though fraught with danger, was guided by the hand of God. The first encounter was tense, heavy with expectation. Pharaoh sat upon his throne, draped in fine linen and jewels, pride radiating from his every gesture. He regarded Moses with curiosity and disdain. "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go?" Pharaoh demanded. His voice echoed in the marble halls, resonant with authority, yet hollow in certainty. Moses answered, his words steady though his heart raced. "The God of the Hebrews commands, 'Let my people go, that they may serve him freely.'" Pharaoh's laughter filled the room, a sound like stones grinding together. He hardened his heart, refusing to release them, confident in his strength, blind to the power that would soon confront him. And so began the series of plagues, each a demonstration of God's might and Pharaoh's fragility. First, the Nile turned to blood, fish floated lifeless, and the water reeked of death. Pharaoh's magicians replicated the act, yet their arts could not withstand divine will. Frogs emerged next, covering the land, filling homes, kitchens, and streets with ceaseless croaking. Pharaoh's heart remained unyielding. Then came the gnats, the flies, and the livestock plague. Egypt's abundance rotted before their eyes, yet the king's pride persisted. Darkness enveloped the land, 3 days without sun, a suffocating shadow that frightened yet did not humble him. Every plague was precise, measured, a call to surrender that he ignored. Finally, the most devastating arrived, the death of the firstborn. Families wept in homes marked with lamb's blood, a sign of God's mercy passing over them, while the Egyptian households mourned their own. Pharaoh, broken by grief beyond measure, summoned Moses in desperation. "Go, take your people. Leave this land," he commanded, voice trembling with sorrow and fear. The Israelites, packed with provisions, moved quickly, leaving behind generations of chains and tears. Joy and relief filled their hearts, yet the shadow of pursuit loomed. Pharaoh's pride, though broken, flared again. He rallied his army, the wheels of war cutting across the sands, and pursued the fleeing people. The cries of horses and the clatter of chariots approached, a storm of steel threatening freedom. Moses stood upon the shore of the Red Sea, the vast waters stretching before him like a wall of uncertainty. Behind, the army thundered, relentless and swift. Fear whispered through the ranks of Israel, panic flickering in their eyes. "Why did you bring us here to die?" they cried, voices trembling in the wind. Moses lifted his staff, the instrument of God's promise. He stretched his hand over the waters, and a wind rose, pushing the sea aside. The waters parted, walls of liquid standing firm, revealing a dry path. The Israelites stepped forward cautiously, awe and terror mingling in their hearts. They moved as one, their faith anchored in the unseen hand guiding them. The Egyptian army surged after them, chariots cutting through the sand, horses snorting, soldiers shouting commands. Moses, staff raised high, eyes fixed on the horizon, watched as the waters returned to their place. The Red Sea swallowed Pharaoh's forces, the roar of the waters echoing like a judgment that could not be denied. Freedom had been secured. The Israelites reached the far shore, hearts pounding with relief and wonder. They stood upon the sand, wet from the passage yet alive, gazing back at the sea that had divided for them. Joy erupted, songs of praise rose to the heavens, tears of liberation fell freely. They had been delivered, not by might alone, but by the power of the God who had called Moses and kept his promise. Moses turned to the people, eyes filled with both relief and solemnity. "The Lord has delivered us," he said. "Remember his hand, obey his ways, and trust in his guidance. This is the God who hears the cries of the oppressed and redeems the faithful." The words resonated through the crowd, settling in hearts like seeds destined to grow. Even in victory, Moses knew the journey had only begun. The land of freedom stretched before them, but it was a wilderness of uncertainty, trial, and endurance. Yet with God as their guide, each step forward was a step toward promise. He reminded them, obedience would protect them, faith would sustain them, and unity would carry them through the unknown. Pharaoh's defiance had ended in devastation. Israel's obedience had begun in triumph. The plagues had been mercies in disguise, tests that revealed the strength of God and the fragility of human pride. The Israelites had witnessed the hand of the Almighty, seen his power over life, death, and the forces of nature. Their hearts were filled with awe and a growing trust that the path ahead, though uncertain, was guided by divine purpose. Moses' leadership became clear. He was not merely a liberator in action but a teacher of faith. Every command he gave, every reassurance he offered, was rooted in the knowledge that God's power was not bound by palace walls, armies, or geography. The Red Sea had proven that freedom was attainable, that God's promise was real, and that obedience, even in fear, could bring the miraculous. The people pressed forward, moving through the wilderness that lay beyond the sea. Their backs no longer bore the whips of Egypt, but the journey tested their patience, endurance, and trust. Moses led them with unwavering resolve, every instruction guided by divine counsel. The same hand that had parted the sea now guided each step along the barren paths, each night beneath the stars, each morning in the scorching sun. They faced hunger, thirst, and uncertainty, Yet the memory of Pharaoh's defeat and the miraculous crossing strengthened their resolve. The nation learned that faith demanded courage, that obedience required trust, and that the hand of God could bring life where only despair seemed to exist. Moses' role was not only to lead but to shape hearts, teaching them that freedom was both a gift and a responsibility, a covenant that demanded reverence and commitment. And so, the Israelites continued, the sound of the sea still echoing behind them as a reminder of God's might. Pharaoh's armies lay defeated, but the lesson lingered. Pride and stubbornness could not withstand the power of the Almighty. For Moses and the people he led, the path of faith stretched endlessly forward, each step a testament to divine guidance, each breath a tribute to the God who had heard the cries of the oppressed and delivered them to freedom. The Red Sea was behind them, its waves still whispering of God's victory, but before the people stretched the long and barren wilderness. The joy of deliverance quickly gave way to the harshness of survival. Sun-scorched sand stretched endlessly, and the nights grew bitterly cold. The Israelites, unaccustomed to freedom's demands, murmured against Moses. Their voices rose in complaint. Why have you brought us into this wilderness? Was Egypt not better, with its food and shelter, than this place of hunger and thirst? Moses bore their cries with patience, though his heart grew heavy. He lifted his prayers to the Almighty, and God answered. Each dawn, flakes of bread like manna covered the ground, sweet to the taste, sustaining every soul. In the evenings, quail descended upon the camp, providing meat. When thirst burned their throats, Moses struck a rock as God commanded, and water gushed forth, pure and cool, flowing in abundance. Each provision reminded them that freedom came with trust in the one who would never abandon them. The wilderness was not only a place of trial for the body, but of testing for the spirit. At Mount Sinai, thunder rolled across the heavens and lightning split the sky. The mountain trembled, cloaked in smoke and fire, and the sound of a trumpet grew louder, as though heaven itself was calling. The people stood at a distance, trembling in awe and fear, while Moses alone ascended the sacred mountain. There, in the thick darkness where God's presence dwelled, Moses received the covenant, the 10 Commandments, carved by the very hand of the Almighty. These words were not mere laws, they were a divine blueprint for life, holiness, and identity. They marked Israel as God's own people, chosen to walk in his ways and reflect his light among nations. Moses held the tablets with reverence, knowing these commandments would bind Israel to their Creator in a covenant of love and obedience. Yet as he descended, tablets in hand, a bitter scene awaited. The people, impatient in his absence, had turned to idolatry. They fashioned a golden calf from their jewelry, bowed before it, and cried, "This is your God who brought you out of Egypt." Their betrayal was a wound to Moses' spirit, and his anger burned hot. He shattered the tablets upon the ground, a sign of the covenant broken by disobedience. God's wrath threatened to consume them, but Moses interceded, pleading with fervor, "Turn from your anger. Do not destroy your people, lest the nations say you delivered them only to perish." His prayer rose like incense, earnest and unrelenting. God relented, sparing them, though judgment fell upon those who led the rebellion. The covenant was renewed, tablets written again, and the people were reminded that mercy could still be found, even after failure. The wilderness became their teacher. It revealed the fragility of human faith and the steadfastness of divine love. Each grumble tested God's patience, each miracle revealed his provision. The fire by night and cloud by day guided them across unmarked paths. Moses, weary yet steadfast, continued to lead, his face shining from encounters with God. He carried upon his shoulders not only the weight of leadership but the burden of intercession, constantly standing between a holy God and a stubborn people. Time stretched into years, yet every sunrise brought another lesson. The tabernacle was built, a dwelling place for God among them, a sign that the Almighty desired not only their obedience but their fellowship. Sacrifices were offered, prayers ascended, and God's presence filled the camp, dwelling with his people in the wilderness. Through hunger, thirst, rebellion, and mercy, Israel learned that freedom was not the absence of hardship but the presence of God in every trial. The wilderness stripped them of pride, tested their loyalty, and shaped them into a nation bound by covenant, not chains. They were no longer slaves of Pharaoh, they were children of the living God, guided by his hand and sustained by his promises. Moses' leadership became a mirror of divine patience. Though he carried frustration, he never abandoned his calling. He taught them that God's law was not a burden but a gift, shaping their identity and guiding their hearts. The wilderness, harsh and unforgiving, became holy ground, for it was there that a nation was born, not through conquest, but through covenant. The journey pressed on, each step forward marked by both struggle and grace. The golden calf's memory lingered, a warning etched deep within their history, but so too did the sight of manna, the sound of water rushing from a rock, and the vision of fire and cloud that never left their side. They had seen their God speak from thunder, write with fire, and forgive with mercy. Each day in the wilderness was both trial and testimony, a reminder that faith required trust, obedience demanded endurance, and covenant was stronger than rebellion. Israel marched onward, hearts still divided between fear and faith, but the promise remained before them. A land of milk and honey awaited, not as a gift of ease, but as an inheritance for those who endured. Yet Moses, the servant of God who had borne the weight of this nation, knew his steps would not cross that river. Long ago, at the waters of Meribah, in a moment of frustration, he had struck the rock twice instead of speaking as God commanded. Though water still flowed to quench Israel's thirst, Moses' disobedience carried consequence. The promise remained true for the people, but for Moses, entry into the land was denied. God led him up the rugged slopes of Mount Nebo. From its summit, the horizon stretched wide and glorious. Valleys carved by rivers glistened in the sunlight, hills rolled like waves of green, and cities nestled among fertile plains. This was the inheritance long spoken of, the land sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the land of rest for a weary nation. Moses' eyes drank in the sight, every corner etched into his memory. There, upon the mountain, God spoke tenderly. "This is the land I swore to give your ancestors. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over." It was not a word of rejection, but of closure. Moses had completed his task. His journey had reached its appointed end. His heart did not rebel, for he understood. His role had been to lead them from bondage, to guide them through wilderness, and to prepare them for covenant. The final step would belong to another. Moses turned his gaze back toward the camp below. He saw a nation no longer broken by chains but bound by faith. They were ready to inherit what God had promised. Joshua, his faithful assistant, had been chosen as their new leader, a man filled with the spirit of wisdom and courage. Moses laid his hands upon him, blessing him before all the people, entrusting to him the mantle of leadership. The crowd watched in silence, hearts stirred with both sorrow and hope, as the shepherd of Israel prepared to bid farewell. The scripture says Moses died there, in the land of Moab, at the command of the Lord. His eyes had not grown dim, nor his strength diminished, but his time had come. God himself buried his servant in a valley, and no man knows the place of his grave to this day. His departure was hidden, holy, and intimate. The leader of Israel carried home not by men, but by the hand of the Almighty. Israel wept for 30 days in the plains of Moab, their cries rising like incense of mourning. They remembered the man who had stood before Pharaoh unshaken, who had stretched forth his staff over the Red Sea, who had ascended into fire to receive the law, and whose face had shone with the glory of God. They grieved for the shepherd who had interceded for them when judgment threatened, who had carried their burdens with patience, and who had taught them what it meant to belong to the Lord. His life was a testimony that one man, yielded to God, can change the course of history. From a baby hidden in a basket to a leader who spoke with God face to face, Moses' story echoed through generations as a reminder of God's power to deliver, guide, and fulfill his promises. The Israelites stood at the river's edge, the future before them, the past behind them. Though Moses had departed, his voice lingered in their hearts, urging them to trust, to obey, to believe. The promised land was theirs to inherit, but the greater promise, the abiding presence of the Almighty, was theirs forever. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share. See you in our next video.